My name is Marie, and until last fall, I genuinely believed I could survive anything if I just stayed quiet long enough. Growing up, silence had been my shield, my armor against the chaos that seemed to follow my family everywhere. I thought family was supposed to protect you, especially when you're a single mom trying to raise a kind little boy in a world that doesn't always reward kindness. But what happened in my in-laws' kitchen that Sunday afternoon shattered every illusion I'd clung to for 28 years. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching this video from. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon in October when we visited my in-laws' house for what was supposed to be a casual family lunch. The autumn leaves crunched under our feet as we walked up the stone pathway to their imposing colonial home. My son Luca had just turned 8 the week before, and I could still see the excitement in his eyes when he talked about his superhero-themed birthday party. He was shy, sweet, a little clumsy, and gentle to a fault. Those were the qualities that made me love him fiercely. But I knew they made him vulnerable in a family that valued strength over sensitivity. I had dressed him carefully that morning in a little blue sweater that brought out his eyes, the same deep brown eyes his father had possessed. I brought along a tray of chocolate chip cookies we'd baked together the night before, our Sunday tradition that had become even more precious since it was just the two of us now. The kitchen had been filled with his laughter as flour dusted his nose, and I'd taken pictures wanting to capture every moment of his joy. I wanted to show Marcus and Patricia that we were doing okay on our own, even without their son beside us anymore, even though some nights I lay awake wondering if I was enough, if I could give Luca everything he deserved. My sister-in-law, Stephanie, was already there when we arrived, her presence announced by the sharp click of her designer heels on the hardwood floor. She moved through the house like she owned the place, which in many ways she did. She wore designer sunglasses indoors despite the cloudy afternoon, her makeup flawless as always. Her perfume so aggressive it made my eyes water. Stephanie had always been the star of this family. Loud, dramatic, impulsive. Praised for her ambition and her ability to command attention wherever she went. Meanwhile, my calmness was mistaken for weakness, my thoughtfulness dismissed as indecision. She looked me up and down with that practiced assessment I'd grown to dread, taking in my simple jeans and cardigan, my minimal makeup, my tired eyes. "You dressed him like a little professor, Marie," she said with a laugh that had sharp edges. "He looks so serious." Patricia laughed, that sharp sound that always made my stomach clench with anxiety. It was the same laugh she'd used when I'd told her about my plans to go to law school, when I'd explained my work with domestic violence survivors, when I'd shared my dreams of making a difference. Marcus didn't even look up from his phone, scrolling through what looked like golf videos, his thick fingers moving across the screen with practiced indifference. I ignored the comment, forcing a smile that felt like plastic on my face. I always did. My legal training had taught me to pick my battles, but sometimes I wondered if I picked too few. Sometimes I wondered if my silence was strength or just another form of surrender. Lunch started off stiff, the kind of tension that settles over a table when everyone's pretending everything is fine but no one actually believes it. The dining room felt oppressive with its heavy curtains and formal place settings. Nothing like the cozy breakfast nook where Luca and I shared our meals at home. Stephanie spent most of the time bragging about her latest brand deal, some skincare line she barely used but promoted religiously on her social media accounts. Her voice carried that fake enthusiasm that influencers perfect, all breathless excitement and manufactured sincerity. She made pointed digs at my stay-at-home lifestyle, suggesting with that saccharine smile that I should get back out there and find myself a man. "No man wants a woman who disappears into motherhood," she said, cutting her salmon with precise movements. "You need to maintain your own identity, Marie. You can't just be Luca's mom forever." The comment stung more than I wanted to admit, hitting that vulnerable spot where all my insecurities lived. I looked at Patricia, silently asking for backup, hoping for just once she might defend me or at least change the subject. Instead, she just refilled Stephanie's wine glass and smiled that tight smile that never reached her eyes. The same smile she'd given me when I'd announced my pregnancy, when I'd married her son, when I'd tried to explain why I'd left my job to focus on raising Luca. "Stephanie has a point," Patricia said, her voice carrying that tone of gentle correction that always made me feel like a child being scolded. "You're still young, Marie. You shouldn't waste your prime years." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm focusing on Luca right now. He's my priority." Of course he is, Marcus said without looking up from his phone. But kids need stability. They need to see their mothers as whole people, not just caregivers. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a man who'd missed half his own son's childhood because of work, lecturing me about wholeness. It wasn't until dessert that the real storm hit. I had just served my homemade cookies, watching Luca's face light up with pride as Marcus grudgingly complimented them. "These are actually pretty good," he'd said, and I'd felt a small victory. Then Luca, reaching for another cookie to share with his grandfather, accidentally knocked over Stephanie's delicate china teacup. It happened in a blink. The cup tipped, tea spilled in a brown cascade across the white tablecloth, and some drops splashed onto Stephanie's cashmere sleeve. The tea was barely lukewarm by then. We'd been sitting there for over an hour, but Stephanie erupted like I'd never seen before. "Are you kidding me?" she screamed, leaping up from her chair so violently it scraped against the floor. "You little brat, look what you've done." Luca froze, his eyes wide and terrified. Those beautiful brown eyes that reminded me so much of his father filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm really, really sorry. I didn't mean to." But Stephanie wasn't finished. Her face was red with rage, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to smudge. She stormed to the counter where Marcus had just finished preparing a fresh pot of tea, grabbed the kettle that was still steaming, yanked it off the base with shaking hands, and without even thinking, flung its contents toward the floor near Luca's feet. "Maybe this will teach you to be more careful," she shrieked. I gasped, my heart stopping for a moment. Luca shrieked and jumped back, his chair clattering to the floor. Boiling tea splashed across the tile, thankfully missing him by inches. The floor hissed and steamed, and I could smell the acrid scent of hot liquid on ceramic. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst. I rushed forward, pulling Luca into my arms, checking every inch of him for burns. His socks were soaked with cooler tea from the table, but his skin was safe, barely. I could feel him trembling against me, his small body shaking with fear and confusion. I turned, eyes blazing with a fury I'd never felt before. "What is wrong with you? He's a child." And you know what Patricia said? She didn't hit him, Marie. Don't be dramatic. Stephanie's just passionate. She has high standards. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend his grandson. He muttered, "Should have kept the kids seated. No discipline anymore. Kids these days think they can just do whatever they want." That moment broke something in me that I didn't even know could break. A silence stretched between us like a crack in the earth, deep and unbridgeable. Stephanie rolled her eyes, sat down again, and poured herself more tea like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just thrown boiling liquid at an 8-year-old child. Luca clung to me, crying softly into my shoulder, and I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. I checked his feet carefully, looking for any sign of burns, any redness that might indicate injury. No burns, just pink from fright, but the betrayal, that would take longer to fade. I packed our things quietly, methodically, the way I'd learned to do everything in this family. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I didn't even cry, not yet. I just folded Luca's sweater, gathered the remaining cookies, and said in a voice that sounded nothing like my own, "Thank you for lunch." Patricia followed me to the door, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "Marie, don't leave like this. Stephanie didn't mean anything by it. She's just stressed about the wedding planning." I turned to look at her, this woman who had raised the man I'd loved, who had held my hand at his funeral, who had promised to always be there for Luca and me. "She threw boiling water at your grandson, Patricia, and you're making excuses for her." "It wasn't at him," she said, her voice taking on that defensive tone. "It was near him. There's a difference." I stared at her for a long moment, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. "You're right. There is a difference. The difference is intent versus result, and both were wrong." As I buckled Luca into his car seat, I looked back at that house, that imposing colonial with its perfect landscaping and expensive furnishings. That house where I'd spent years learning that love was conditional, loyalty was selective, and my pain was always too inconvenient to acknowledge. Where I'd been taught that keeping peace was more important than keeping safe. That's when I decided they would never have access to me or my son again. Not until they learned the meaning of consequences. And I would make sure Stephanie understood exactly what passion without boundaries costs. 3 weeks passed. I didn't answer their texts, each one more demanding than the last. I ignored their missed calls, letting them go to voicemail where Patricia's voice grew increasingly shrill. I left their birthday voicemail for Luca unheard, knowing it would be full of guilt and manipulation. I wasn't going to pretend anymore. Meanwhile, I focused all my energy on Luca. He had nightmares for days after that Sunday, waking up screaming about hot water and angry voices. He'd cry in his sleep, mumbling, "Don't yell at me. I'll be good. I'll be good." I sat beside his bed every night, stroking his hair and whispering promises I intended to keep. "No one will hurt you again. I promise. Mommy won't let anyone hurt you. But a promise means nothing if you don't act on it." And I was done with empty words. Then something strange happened. One morning, while Luca was at school and I was reviewing case files for the pro bono work I'd started taking on, I got an email from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I read it. Apparently, Marcus and Patricia were working with Stephanie to apply for emergency guardianship over Luca, claiming I was mentally unstable and creating parental alienation by denying family contact. The words blurred on the screen as I read them again and again. Unfit mother, emotional instability, denial of grandparent rights, in the best interest of the child. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. I almost threw the mug across the room, almost gave in to the rage that was building inside me like a storm. They were trying to take my child. They were trying to take the one person who mattered more to me than breathing. I called the lawyer's office myself, taking deep breaths to keep my voice steady. I pretended to be interested in resolving things quietly, in finding a compromise that would work for everyone. That's when I learned it was Stephanie's fiancé's firm, a detail that made everything click into place. Oh, so it was personal. So this was revenge. I knew Stephanie. I'd watched her for years, seen how she operated. She was always obsessed with winning, with being right, with getting her way. But this was war. And she had no idea who she was fighting. What she didn't know was that I had already started preparing for exactly this kind of battle. The day we left their house, I'd taken Luca straight to Dr. Sarah Chen, a trauma therapist who specialized in children. Every session was documented. Every breakthrough recorded, every nightmare catalogued. I kept receipts, medical records, detailed notes about Luca's progress. I saved screenshots of texts where Patricia mocked my parenting style and Marcus called me overly emotional for protecting my son. And then I played my ace. You see, what no one knew, not Stephanie, not even Marcus and Patricia, was that I had once worked with a nonprofit called Safe Harbor that helped domestic abuse survivors navigate the legal system. I'd spent 3 years learning the law inside out, understanding the power of evidence, the importance of documentation, the way courts really worked beyond the idealistic version they teach in law school. I knew exactly how to file an emergency protective order, especially one backed with professional testimony and an unshakable paper trail. I knew which judges were sympathetic to mothers, which ones understood the subtle forms of emotional abuse that often got dismissed. I knew how to make a case that would stick, but I didn't stop there. I had also saved copies of Marcus and Patricia's financial documents from when I used to do their taxes during my brief stint as a tax preparer. It was tedious work, but it had taught me to read financial statements like a detective novel. My name was still attached to a family investment fund from years ago, a fund they'd forgotten I co-owned because they never thought quiet little Marie would have the backbone to use it. I withdrew every dollar legally, quietly, through a series of carefully timed transactions that looked completely ordinary. Then I called Sunrise Manor, the luxury retirement home they'd been on the waiting list for, and cancelled their application. I used my legal share of the fund to dissolve their financial eligibility, leaving them scrambling to find alternative arrangements. Stephanie, I hit her where it hurt most. Remember that skincare brand she bragged about constantly, Clean Beauty Co., the company that had made her feel like a real influencer? I emailed them anonymously with video clips taken from that lunch. Her screaming at a child, yelling, "Brat!" The boiling water splashing on the floor while an 8-year-old cowered in fear. Yes, I'd had my phone recording in my pocket the whole time. It was a reflex I'd picked up from working in legal aid, always having evidence ready, always being prepared for the worst-case scenario. The audio was crystal clear, Stephanie's voice, shrill and cruel, Patricia's dismissive laughter, Marcus's victim-blaming response. 2 weeks later, Clean Beauty Co. cut ties with her. Her sponsorship contract was terminated. Her online followers began to plummet as word spread. One Reddit thread went viral, Is Stephanie Carter actually abusive? Here's what happened when she lost her temper at a family dinner. The comments were brutal. Imagine throwing boiling water near a child. And the family defended her? Toxic. That poor little boy. I'm never buying from any brand that works with her. Still, I didn't speak publicly. I didn't show up to defend myself or tell my side of the story. I let my silence roar, let the evidence speak for itself. The final straw came when Marcus and Patricia showed up at my apartment doorstep on a Tuesday evening. They didn't knock politely. They banged on the door like they were trying to break it down. Their voices loud enough that Mrs. Rodriguez next door peeked out to see what was happening. "Marie, this has gone too far." Patricia's voice was shrill, desperate. "You're destroying this family." Luca was at his after-school art program, thank God. I opened the door slowly, calmly holding the legal restraining order in my hand. I'd had it expedited, paying extra for same-day service. "You are no longer allowed within 200 feet of me or my son," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Marcus tried to push past me, his face red with anger. "We're your family, Marie. We raised you like our own daughter." "No," I said, stepping back but keeping my voice firm. "You're their family, but you were never mine. You made that clear every day for 8 years." He turned to Patricia, his eyes wild with frustration. "Say something. Fix this." She crossed her arms, that familiar defensive posture I'd seen so many times. "Marie, she didn't mean to hurt Luca. You know Stephanie. She's just passionate about things." "You're being dramatic." I raised my voice for the first time in years, letting all the anger and hurt and betrayal pour out. "That's not drama, Patricia. That's abuse. And you enabled it. You sat there and watched your daughter throw boiling liquid near a child, and you called it passion." They both flinched, actually stepping back from the force of my words. "You watched her scream at an 8-year-old boy, call him a brat, terrorize him until he cried, and you defended her. You blamed him for not having enough discipline. You blamed me for being too emotional. And now you're angry that I finally stood up for my son?" They were speechless, their mouths opening and closing like fish out of water. "You taught me that silence was survival." I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You taught me that keeping peace was more important than keeping safe. But I'm teaching my son something different. I'm teaching him that silence ends cycles, that we don't protect abusers just because they share our blood." Then I closed the door and turned the deadbolt, listening as they stood there for several minutes, whispering furiously to each other before finally walking away. That night, Luca and I danced barefoot in the kitchen to music playing from my phone. We ate the cookies I'd saved from that terrible lunch, laughing as we got chocolate on our fingers. We talked about his day at school, about his art project, about everything except the people who used to be in our lives. For the first time in years, I felt free, truly free. But I wasn't done yet. There was still work to do, still justice to be served. 3 months had passed since that Sunday lunch, and the changes were remarkable. Luca was healing in ways that amazed me every day. He still had moments, flinches when a voice was raised or when someone moved too fast, but he was blooming again like a flower after a long winter. He painted every day, creating beautiful watercolors of dragons and castles and happy families. He laughed more, smiled more, slept through the night without nightmares. His therapist said the transformation was remarkable, that children were resilient when they felt safe and supported. Me? I was finally building something of my own, something that mattered beyond just survival. It started with a local community group for mothers like me, women who had been gaslit by their families, dismissed by courts or called dramatic for protecting their children. We met at the community centre on Thursday evenings, sharing stories over coffee and store-bought cookies. Sarah, whose mother-in-law had hit her toddler and blamed it on old-fashioned discipline. Jennifer, whose father had screamed at her autistic son until he had a meltdown, then demanded she fix him. Maria, whose sister had deliberately exposed her daughter to allergens to toughen her up. Each story was different, but the pattern was always the same: abuse disguised as love, cruelty justified as caring. We met once a week, then twice. Soon I had enough stories to realize this wasn't just my story. It was happening everywhere, in every neighborhood, in every social class. I wasn't alone, and neither were they. So I built something bigger. With help from Elena Martinez, a former colleague from Safe Harbor who had gone on to start her own practice, I registered the Quiet Flame Project. It was a support network and legal fund for mothers escaping family-based emotional abuse. complete with a website, a hotline, and a network of volunteer lawyers who worked pro bono. The name came from something Luca had said during one of our kitchen conversations. "Mommy, you're like a quiet flame." He'd told me, his 8-year-old wisdom shining through. "You don't make noise, but you make light." We got local coverage first, a small piece in the community newspaper. Then regional attention when a blogger picked up the story. A viral TikTok creator interviewed me anonymously. My voice disguised, my face obscured. But my words were clear: if they call her passionate, ask them why the child's still crying. That phrase spread everywhere. It became a hashtag, a rallying cry, a way for people to identify family abuse that had been normalized for too long. Ask why the child is crying became a movement. Meanwhile, Stephanie tried to pivot to being a healing coach online, capitalizing on mental health trends to rebuild her brand. But it didn't work. The brand partnerships were gone. The trust was broken. Old DMs leaked where she'd mocked fans who opened up about their struggles. A mother she'd bullied during a live stream came forward. Then another and another. Her comment sections became battlegrounds. Eventually, her Instagram was wiped clean. Her TikTok deleted, her LinkedIn profile removed. She reached out to me once, an email with the subject line, "Let's end this war." The message was short. "I know you're behind this. What do you want?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to because the final blow was already in motion. At Luca's school's spring showcase, I sat in the 3rd row, my heart pounding with pride and nervousness. The elementary school auditorium was packed with parents, grandparents, siblings, all there to celebrate their children's achievements. Luca stood on stage in front of hundreds of people, wearing his best button-down shirt and the confidence he'd built over months of therapy and love. He was reading a poem he'd written himself, something he'd been working on secretly with his teacher, Mrs. Patterson. I didn't know what it would be about, but I knew it would be honest. Luca had learned to speak his truth. He looked at the microphone, his small hands shaking slightly, and began in a voice that was stronger than I'd ever heard it. My family said I should be quiet, that children should be seen and not heard. But quiet felt like drowning, like going underwater where nobody could find me. My mom said, "Speak louder, baby. Tell your story." So I did, and the whole world started listening. The poem went on, talking about fear and safety, about voices that hurt and voices that heal, about the difference between being quiet because you're scared and being quiet because you're peaceful. When he finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. People stood and clapped, some wiping away tears. I was sobbing, not caring who saw me. In that moment, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need apologies or dramatic confessions, because I had something better: the truth, and my son's voice, strong and clear and unafraid. As the crowd applauded, I looked toward the back of the room, and there they were, Marcus and Patricia standing far behind the other parents, not clapping, not smiling, just watching with expressions I couldn't read. They weren't invited, but I wasn't surprised. They'd probably heard about the showcase through the school's public announcements. They looked older now, somehow diminished. Marcus's shoulders were stooped. Patricia's hair was grayer than I remembered. They were outsiders in this world of celebration and joy, observers at the edge of a life they'd chosen to abandon. And when Luca stepped off that stage and ran into my arms full of light and safety and fire, I realized something profound they'd lost. Not because I'd fought them, but because I'd chosen not to become them. Because I'd chosen to protect rather than to please, to build rather than to tear down. Because I'd created a life where my son would never again question if he mattered, if he was worth protecting, if his voice deserved to be heard. So when Patricia whispered from the back of the auditorium, "Marie, please," her voice breaking on the words, I held Luca close, kissed his forehead and turned my back to them for the final time. "Let's go home," I said, my voice steady and sure. We walked away together, my son's hand in mine, leaving behind the people who had taught me that love was conditional and loyalty was selective. Justice wasn't screaming in court or proving my point in dramatic confrontations. It was walking away without needing their validation, without requiring their approval. It was raising a child who knew his worth, who understood that his voice mattered, who would never accept abuse disguised as love. That was the sweetest revenge of all, not becoming the people who had hurt us, but becoming the people we were meant to be all along.